September 28, 2025, at exactly 6:34 p.m., the screens turned red simultaneously in Russia's Western Border Integrated Air Defense Command Centers. This was not a simple attack coming from a single direction. It was a synchronized nightmare targeting three separate oblasts, Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk, at the same time. At that moment, two M142 HIMARS batteries had moved into firing position. They were positioned just behind civilian settlements north of Kharkiv. Dozens of low and medium-altitude targets were advancing from Ukrainian territory deep into Russia. These were no ordinary FPV drones. They were UJ-26 Bober ER and Shyla 400 long-range kamikaze drones, each carrying warheads weighing 30 to 50 kilograms. The Panzer S1 and Tor M2 batteries in the area reacted immediately, the sky filled with flashes illuminated by missile trails and anti-aircraft artillery shells. Each successful interception was recorded as a victory in the ledgers of Russian control center operators. The airspace was secure, the systems were functioning flawlessly. However, this artificially created sense of security was merely the first act of a carefully designed multi-layered strategy. While they hunted the noise in the sky, the real threat advanced silently and lethally in orbit, hidden behind this electronic cacophony. At that very moment, at the height of the chaos, 6 completely different high-speed trails appeared on the radar screens monitoring Belgorod. These were not drones. They weren't flying horizontally. They were diving straight down from the upper layers of the atmosphere at speeds exceeding 2.5 times the speed of sound. All the noise in the command center fell silent for a moment. This was the moment the game changed. This threat was M31G MLRS rockets fired from the M142 HIMARS system. Without hesitation, the Russian commander ordered the activation of the S-400 battery, which had remained silent until then and was stationed in a secret location, the most valuable asset in the area. The massive 92N6E gravestone radar emitted a powerful signal, locking onto all 6 targets, and within seconds, 648 N6DM interceptor missiles were launched into the sky at Mach 6. A few seconds later, 6 large explosions occurred in the upper layers of the atmosphere. In the Russian control center, the operator's voice echoed, "All targets destroyed! Direct hits! All 6 ballistic threats intercepted!" A wave of relief and pride swept through the room. They had repelled the most complex and multi-layered attack in their history. However, hundreds of kilometers away, in a secret underground headquarters in Ukraine, no one was disappointed. On the contrary, the most critical phase of the plan had been completed with absolute success. The first act of the operation had begun hours earlier. A massive swarm of hundreds of UAVs had been sent to 8 different regions of Russia: Kursk, Bryansk, Belgorod, Tula, Yaroslavl, Rostov, Novgorod, and Samara. This was one of the largest and most coordinated drone attacks Russia had ever seen, and its purpose was not to hit the target, but to create a veil of chaos. While the Russian military declared victory, they were unaware that they had fallen into a massive trap. This swarm was designed as a smokescreen to occupy Russia's expensive air defense batteries, deplete their ammunition, and most importantly, distract their attention by locking their radars in different directions. Because the real target was in Russia's Belgorod Oblast, about 90 kilometers from Kharkiv. But this was no ordinary target. As confirmed by open-source intelligence platforms and satellite data, the thermal power plant known as Belgorodskaya TETS was a systemic center of gravity. It was the heart of the entire region's military and industrial nerve network. This plant supplied the main supply and command areas of Russia's 20th Guards Combined Arms Army, responsible for some of the bloodiest operations in eastern Ukraine. However, Ukrainian intelligence knew that this target was heavily guarded, precisely because it was so critical. This is where Ukraine's ingenuity came into play, a strategy to saturate and deceive Russian air defenses. In a secret underground headquarters in Ukraine, an electronic warfare officer pointed to the glowing signal on his screen. "Fired. We have the exact coordinates, operating frequency, and signal strength of the S-400 radar. Send the second salvo. Fire at will." At that moment, what the Russians thought was victory turned out to be a cruel trap. Those $6 million HIMARS rockets were not an attack vehicle. They were the most expensive and fastest decoys in history. Their mission was not to hit the target, but to force that secret S-400 to fire, revealing its location, identity, and electronic fingerprint. This created a fatal gap in Russian defenses. The S-400's coordinates and frequency information were immediately relayed to a second HIMARS battery waiting in a different location and to heavy kamikaze drones like the UJ-26 Bober advancing toward the area. Now the real hunt was beginning, 1846. In a different location, the second HIMARS crew, waiting in absolute silence, received the updated fire order. The second 6-round salvo was fired at the vulnerable target, the main target, which was either reloading new missiles at that moment or in a critical recalibration cycle lasting a few seconds after a powerful engagement. The thermal power plant, the heart of the Belgorod energy network. With the launch of this second salvo, the air of victory in the Russian command center gave way to an icy shock. 6 new ballistic trails appeared on the screen. The second wave was coming. Screams rose. The M31 GMLRS missiles had crossed the Russian border in just 40 seconds from an orbit close to the edge of the atmosphere. Operators frantically tried to re-engage the S-400, but the system was in that critical few seconds of blind spot. Meanwhile, the Pantsir and Tor batteries were still battling the Bober and Shyla drones filling the sky, which were now heading toward the known positions of the S-400 batteries. As the HIMARS missiles made their final dive toward the target, the S-400's radar reactivated, detected the threat, and a Russian officer attempted to alert his superiors. But at that very moment, a UJ-26 Bober, which had been hiding at low altitude until then, made its final dive directly toward the command vehicle housing the radar control center. The S-400's radar was not designed to detect and hit such a small target at such close range. The surrounding Pantsir and Tor systems were busy targeting other drone swarms approaching from different directions. For just a few seconds, a deadly gap opened up in the defense network. When the UJ-26 Bober struck the brain of the S-400 with its 40-kilogram warhead, there were less than 30 seconds left before the HIMARS missiles reached their target. The gravestone radar screen went dark for a moment. This was the moment when the only system capable of stopping the second wave was blind. This time, there was nothing to stop them. The time was exactly 1847. 6 HIMARS rockets, each programmed to hit its target with a circular error probability, CEP, of less than 5 meters, struck the main transformer station, the heart of Belgorod's energy grid, with absolute precision. This was not a simple explosion, but an uncontrolled chain reaction. The 90-kilogram single-piece warheads instantly shattered tons of steel and copper structures. High-voltage lines snapped, a massive electrical arc turned night into day, and the heart of the regional grid stopped. And then, absolute darkness. The energy supplied by the Belgorod thermal power plant powered the radars, the eyes of the S-300 and S-400 air defense batteries in the region, and the complex communication systems in the command shelters. Most importantly, it powered the electrical signaling infrastructure, the lifeblood of the railway network that transported ammunition, fuel, and soldiers to the front. Hitting this plant meant not just turning off the lights, but blinding an army's eyes, deafening its ears, and crippling its legs. When the power grid collapsed, it created a domino effect. Water pumps stopped, internet connections were cut, and life in the city of 500,000 came to a virtual standstill. As the hours passed, this situation turned into an existential crisis. People trapped in elevators, roads blocked due to non-functioning traffic lights, and shops that could only sell goods for cash. Heating systems stopped, water was cut off, and the internet and mobile communication infrastructure collapsed. Miles-long queues at gas stations, people fighting over generator fuel, crowds storming supermarkets. All of this was a state of total panic and chaos. While the Russian Defense Ministry triumphantly announced that it had shot down 230 UAVs, it was unaware that it had actually fallen into a massive trap. When the governor of Belgorod made a statement at 7:07 p.m., the Kremlin was confronted with the bitter truth. The Russian Defense Ministry's propaganda that we hit hundreds of targets instantly collapsed with Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov's panicked confession that there was an attack on our critical infrastructure facility and serious power outages are occurring. On the evening of September 28th, Russian media's attempt to portray the incident as a transformer failure was debunked within seconds by NASA's FIR-MS satellite system, which detected a massive fire in the area, and by videos taken by civilians. This operation was a massive military symphony in which more than 230 UAVs served a single purpose: to ensure that a few HIMARS rockets reached their target. And when those rockets reached their target, They destroyed not only a power plant, but also Russia's myth of invincibility. Ukraine's precision strike operation against the Belgorod thermal power plant on September 28, 2025, will go down in history as a turning point in the war. The consequences of the Belgorod attack extended far beyond the destroyed transformers and darkened cities. It was a catastrophic collapse of a system and fundamentally shook Russia's established military doctrine. Russian military thinking has always been based on the idea of keeping the war far from its own borders. The Belgorod attack painfully demonstrated that this doctrine is no longer valid in the era of long-range precision weapons in Ukraine's hands. The concept of a front line no longer existed. A rocket fired from Kharkiv could hit Moscow's backyard. The impact of this situation on the morale of soldiers at the front was devastating in the truest sense of the word. To understand the genius of the attack, one must first understand the target itself. Why the Belgorodskaya TETS was not a randomly chosen civilian infrastructure facility, but rather the heart of an entire region's military and industrial nerve network, a systemic center of gravity. Ukraine's target was not the megawatts produced by the power plant. The real target was everything that depended on those megawatts. The railways supplying the Russian army's southern front, the factories producing ammunition, and the command centers directing the troops. According to analyses by think tanks such as the Institute for the Study of War, the Belgorod Oblast served as a vital rear base for operations in Ukraine. This region in particular sustained the main supply and command areas of Russia's 20th Guards Combined Arms Army, responsible for the bloodiest operations in eastern Ukraine. The uninterrupted and stable energy provided by the plant was essential for the functioning of every part of this massive military structure. A power outage meant that the region's ammunition depots, armored vehicle maintenance workshops, electronic listening stations, and most importantly, the forward command centers where troops were managed, would instantly be plunged into darkness and silence. Of course, these facilities had generators. However, a generator cannot rotate the massive S-400 radar antennas for hours, nor can it simultaneously and reliably power strategic satellite communication terminals or all the barracks housing thousands of soldiers. That night, Russian commanders found themselves transported from the battlefield of the 21st century back to the dark analog world of the 20th century. Encrypted communication lines were cut, situational awareness screens went dark, and the flow of real-time intelligence from the front lines was severed like a knife. It was like cutting off the oxygen supply to an army's brain. The wheels of the industrial war machine also came to a sudden halt. Industrial facilities in and around Belgorod had rapidly shifted to producing ammunition, military equipment parts, and repair services with the onset of war. Facilities such as the Karachevsky Elektrodel factory in the Bryansk region, which was attacked, specialized in the development and production of critical electrical connectors for military and industrial use. The power outage was a crowbar inserted into the gears of this massive production machine. Production lines suddenly stopped with a deafening screech. Machines pressing artillery shells fell silent. Robotic arms welding tank armor hung suspended in mid-air. Modern industry depends on stable, high-quality energy. The fluctuating power supplied by generators cannot run precision CNC machines or lines producing complex electronic components. Every passing hour meant hundreds fewer artillery shells, dozens fewer repaired vehicles, and truckloads less ammunition reaching the front lines. But the most devastating link in this domino effect emerged when it hit the railway network, the steel backbone of the Russian army. Russian military doctrine relies heavily on railways to transport large quantities of materials and personnel over long distances. Belgorod was one of the most critical junctions of this backbone. The lines passing through here connected resources from Russia's interior to Donbass and Crimea via Rostov in the south. A large portion of these lines are electrified. When the electricity went out, all signaling, switch control, and communication systems managing these lines shut down instantly. Fuel tankers, ammunition wagons, trains full of soldiers, all were trapped in Belgorod's dark labyrinth. Russian logistics had collapsed in an instant. Using only a few hundred kilograms of explosives, Ukraine managed to take tens of thousands of tons of steel and thousands of soldiers out of action without firing a single shot. The military genius of the Belgorod operation lies not only in choosing the right target, but also in the multi-layered deception strategy used to reach that target. This was a masterclass in reinterpreting classic military tactics with 21st century technology. The most daring and clever part of the operation was the use of the first HIMARS salvo as bait, sacrificing 6 GMLRS rockets, each worth approximately $170,000, knowing they would be destroyed, required a cool-headed risk analysis. However, the reward far outweighed the risk. This operation left Moscow with an impossible choice: protect its frontline troops or its own infrastructure in strategic depth. It was no longer possible to do both perfectly at the same time. After this attack, Russia was forced to withdraw some of its most advanced air defense systems from the front lines and redeploy them to protect cities such as Belgorod and Kursk, as well as other critical infrastructure facilities. Every S-400 or Pantsir battery withdrawn from the front line opened a new window of opportunity for Ukraine's own air force, drones, and cruise missiles. To protect its own territory, Russia had to leave the territory it had occupied more vulnerable. This was a brilliant victory of intelligence over brute force, with the cost calculated. This operation proved that modern warfare is no longer won only on the front lines, between tanks and trenches, but also at critical junctures in the enemy's strategic depth. Through the perfect synchronization of technology, intelligence, and psychological warfare, Ukraine did not merely strike a target, it also forced its adversary to use its own strength against itself, delivering a masterclass in the art of modern warfare. Thank you for choosing us.